Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Stephanie Brown and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the Know Our Story Toolkit for Social Equity and Inclusion. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Director of the Stronger Futures Centre of Research Excellence and the Head of the Intergenerational Health Group at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. Before we begin, it is both an honour and a privilege to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, Woiwurrung clans and other traditional owners of the lands on which we meet virtually today. Lands that in the country now known as Australia have never been ceded. On behalf of the Stronger Futures CRE, the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and the Victorian Foundation for Survivors of Torture, the co-hosts of today's event, I would like to acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and other Indigenous elders, community leaders and colleagues present today. And as a fifth generation Australian of Irish and Scottish heritage, I also pay deepest respects to the diverse cultural heritages of everyone who has joined us for this occasion. The initiative we're launching today is the outcome of a long-term partnership between the Stronger Futures CRE, the Intergenerational Health Group at MCRI, and the Victorian Foundation for Survivors of Torture, also known as Foundation House. The Stronger Futures CRE is Australia's first national collaborative centre that's working with communities of refugee backgrounds and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to break cycles of intergenerational trauma and social inequity. The Intergenerational Health Group at MCRI is home to the Refugee and Migrant Health Research Program at the Institute and a long-term collaborator with Foundation House. Foundation House supports survivors of torture and other traumatic experiences of refugee backgrounds living in Victoria. As host of today's proceedings, my first task before I introduce Paris Aristotle as our esteemed guest speaker is to provide you with some context to explain why we decided to develop the Know Our Story Toolkit. After Paris has spoken, I'll provide you with a bit more detail about the resources in the toolkit and explain how you can access them. But first, a little bit about the why. We're living in a changing global context with many people on the move, including many who've been forcibly displaced from countries of origin, much like my Irish ancestors. As a result, Australia is changing. 20 years ago, around 1 in 5 women giving birth in Victoria was born overseas in a lower middle income country where English is not the first language. Now that figure is around 1 in 3. 20 years ago, it was common for population health and clinical researchers to design studies that systematically excluded anyone who wasn't sufficiently fluent in English to read and understand a consent form or complete a questionnaire in English. That is no longer acceptable and probably never should have been acceptable as something that public health or clinical researchers would do. Know Our Story is about embracing this challenge. It's about developing more inclusive research practices to enable participation of socially and culturally diverse populations in both clinical and population health research. And most importantly, it's about ensuring that communities of refugee and migrant backgrounds are invited to participate in ways that respect the knowledge they bring of their communities. The Know Our Story Toolkit comprises an animation, which we'll share shortly, and 5 resources designed to support clinical and population health researchers seeking to work towards greater social inclusion in research practices. The toolkit reflects the knowledge and contribution of many people, but most importantly, it reflects the partnership between our research group and Foundation House. It therefore gives me very great pleasure to hand over to Paris Aristotle, the Chief Executive Officer of Foundation House, as our guest speaker to officially launch the toolkit. Paris has over 30 years' experience supporting refugees and people seeking asylum, in particular providing leadership and advocacy for the provision of services to survivors of torture and other traumatic experiences. He served on numerous government committees and is currently a member of the Commonwealth Settlement Advisory Council and the Victorian Mental Health Ministerial Advisory Council. Paris, we are truly very honoured to have you with us here today.
Thanks for those remarks, Stephanie. It's great to be here. Can I also pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which we are collectively meeting, in our case, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. In doing so, I also would like to add that in keeping with our mission, I acknowledge the displacement and trauma that Indigenous communities have endured, and that in spite of that displacement, these lands were never ceded. I acknowledge also that no matter what any of our positions may be with respect to the upcoming referendum, and mine personally will be to vote yes, we must all maintain a commitment to embark in the future on a path that pays due respect to proper reconciliation, truth-telling and treaty, and we need to do so with open hearts and open minds. I'm delighted to be involved in launching these resources today. Our work at Foundation House is dedicated to the plight of refugees and asylum seekers, with the goal of supporting them to rebuild their lives in Australia in safety, with dignity and with respect. For those of you who may not know us well, we've almost 300 staff operating from 5 sites across Melbourne, and through partnerships with health services in rural and regional Victoria, we deliver services there as well. We work across the lifespan. We run community capacity building programs. We work in schools and in the early years sectors, amongst an array of other activities, which includes professional development and training. Refugees endure persecution, violence and loss that's often unfathomable to most people in Australia. Torture and other forms of extreme violence are commonplace, often perpetrated by governments or insurgents with devastating effect. One of the understandable consequences that accompanies their subsequent trauma is a deep lack of trust in government agencies, institutions, people holding positions of authority, and in communities more broadly. Trust is often crushed. This is not unusual or abnormal. Their experiences and reactions are in fact sane reactions to insane events, and that reality creates complexity in how we can and must seek to support and work with them through trusted relationships. In our work and in the work of MCRI, building trust, restoring safety and enhancing a sense of control in the lives of refugees are the cornerstones of respectful engagement and partnering. They're also the cornerstones to supporting recovery. That's one of the key reasons why the material developed by Stephanie and her team to guide their work, and that of others smart enough to learn from it, is so important. Some of the key words from those documents: partnering, social equity and inclusion, thoughtfulness, cultural adaptation, they all speak to the values of respect, safety, control and dignity. From its early days, the vision of Foundation House has been that while providing direct client services is going to be and continues to be our core business, effectively responding to the needs of refugees and survivors of torture and other traumatic events also needed a response that would be more actively engaged in broader endeavours. We developed what we called an integrated service delivery model, in which direct client services was to be complemented by a range of other actions. That included professional development and training, research and evaluation, of course, building strategic relationships to advocate for improvements in mainstream services, and to have the capacity to utilise evidence-based advocacy to influence and improve government policies, programs and funding that would better meet the needs of our clients and their communities. When it came to research, we undertook a variety of of research and evaluation activities with internal resources that we could muster, and academic partners who had either secured funding from various quarters or offered their support on a pro bono basis. About 20 years ago, we saw the need and an opportunity for a more concerted effort. We prepared proposals and established what we described as the Refugee Health and Social Wellbeing Research Program. It was a program that was funded over a 5-year period through philanthropic trusts, and it was the start of a bigger investment in research on our behalf. It gave us the resources to be open to strategic partnerships and not just ad hoc projects. But undertaking good research geared at achieving impact is not necessarily easy. Struggling to build relationships in academic environments where resources are scarce and competition is, well, let's face it, borderline insane, proved to be a real challenge for us. But we also knew that there were many brilliant minds backed by great values and real commitment. That's certainly the case when it comes to MCRI. In counting the MCRI refugee and migrant research team as a potential major partner was a fortuitous rather than an arranged marriage. We hit it off from the beginning. Stephanie and her colleagues didn't see us as a passive contributor of funds, an attractive supporter of funding applications, but as an active partner who could contribute intellectually and in practical ways through knowledge of and real connections with refugee communities. And we had in common a high regard for the resilience, capabilities and contribution that people of refugee backgrounds could make to the work that we do. In fact, we both believed strongly that the best, most effective and intelligent outcomes would only be possible when partnering with refugee communities sat at the core of our work. It has been an absolutely terrific relationship, and I look forward to its continuation and strengthening into the future. I want to speak briefly about the importance of the Know Our Story resources that we're launching this morning. It is very apparent how much thought and effort has gone into the way that the ideas are communicated to enhance their accessibility to readers beyond the usual academic and policy wonks. No offence to anyone out there who would see themselves as a policy wonk interested in these subjects. I think they will encourage more and better research, and both of these outcomes are vitally important. There's a significant dearth of research about health and other inequities affecting migrants generally and people of refugee backgrounds specifically. The Commonwealth Treasury recently published Measuring What Matters, the first iteration of a national wellbeing framework. The report acknowledges areas where improvements to the framework have been suggested and had this to say. Overall, wellbeing indicators could benefit from better coverage of cohorts, such as people with disabilities, unpaid carers, First Nations people, children and youth outcomes, culturally and linguistically diverse people, including refugees and LGBTIQA+ people. But it's not just research conducted in traditional methods that it is increasingly recognised as valuable, if not imperative. Translating respect for the contribution of refugees and migrants to research into practical strategies is more easily said than done. I'm confident that these resources will help researchers do that better. I think it is worth observing that increasing the roles of refugees and migrants in research about them is an aspect of themes evident more generally. Certainly, people of refugee backgrounds have become increasingly more engaged in the areas in which I work in advocacy and in service design and delivery. It wasn't the case 35 years ago when I started in this field, but it certainly is today and increasingly so. Recognition of the need to more actively engage and empower affected populations is, of course, far broader than just in the refugee space. The slogan, nothing about us without us, applies to an increasingly wide variety of groups. In Victoria, that is very apparent in the work of a recent Royal Commission into the state's mental health and wellbeing services. a key theme of the Commission's analysis was the importance of involving more people with lived experience throughout the system, not just being consulted, but managing and partnering in service design and delivery. That's happening, and we're supporting and contributing to this development in the areas in which we're involved. There's no turning back from that direction, and we look forward to walking along that path with MCRI into the future. I want to thank and congratulate Stephanie and all of those who've been involved in the preparation of these significant resources. They're the sorts of tools that help others understand how they can do this work better as well. And as we build that knowledge more generally, we will be able to lift all sectors together in a collegial fashion that is better informed, has much greater participation, and is as a consequence likely to yield much better outcomes for the people we care about. So congratulations, Stephanie, and to everybody involved. These are fantastic resources, and it's a real honour to be able to help you launch them today. I think we're clicking over. I was told I needed to fill space in case that takes a little bit of time, but while I am filling the space, to all of those at MCRI, we at Foundation House not only want to continue working with you, but we're actively looking at the moment into how we can increase our investment in our partnership, because it has been that strong and that positive from our perspective. We couldn't have found better partners to work with in the research sense than all of you guys. So we're really keen to continue and keep investing in that.
Okay, everyone. So what is important for your care providers to know about you? Care providers like doctors? Yeah, doctors, nurses, midwives, other health professionals.
I wish they knew our story.
Where we have come from, what we've been through, how we see the world.
When I was 5, there was a terrible war in my country. My family and I were forced to leave everything behind. I even had to leave my favorite cow. We started life in Adelaide with nothing but each other. Family is very important in my culture.
When we first arrived, I had to learn the language and help my mum and dad when they needed to make appointments or go to the doctors. I would often interpret for them and read important documents to them, even though I could barely understand the meaning myself. It was a lot of pressure for a young child. Experience shapes you, and the experience of someone with a refugee background is entirely different from someone who is born here. I think it's important to understand how hard it can be for a refugee navigating work, a second or a third language, and trauma.
My health and my baby's health are very important to me, same as any mother. But honestly, I felt unsafe in some of my experiences in the healthcare system here.
Sometimes when I receive healthcare, health professionals treat me like I don't belong because I speak different or look different. It can make you feel very alone.
I love both your cute koalas and your culture. And the more you come to understand about mine, the better you understand about me and my family's need for care. There is a real beauty in this sharing.
If you welcome me and my family into your care, I know I will have a happy heart.
And hopefully yours will too.
Know our story.
There we go, just a few technical difficulties there, but that was a wonderful animation put together by our team, and we are officially launched. Thank you, Paris, for those very thoughtful, equally thoughtful and inspiring and generous words about our partnership, and also the commitment to hearing the voices of people of refugee backgrounds living in our country and what it means to think about the way in which we can both provide services and undertake research and develop evidence to inform those services in ways that genuinely engage with the communities that those services are seeking to support. It's now my task to tell you a little bit more about what's in the toolkit. First of all, in the animation, the voices and the stories you heard are the voices of researchers in our team and stories that they have shared with us. Our purpose in putting together the animation was to inspire you about what's possible if we work in partnership with communities of refugee and migrant backgrounds. The purpose of the 5 resources that you can see on your screen is to provide a bit more of a practical guide to just some of the issues that researchers seeking to engage with communities of refugee and migrant backgrounds in either population health or clinical research studies may need to consider, and some examples of strategies and approaches that we collectively have found helpful. The resources are not intended to be prescriptive. There's not one right way to do things that will work in all circumstances. And indeed, one of the first projects that we conducted in partnership with Foundation House was called a proof of concept project for this very reason. We wanted to try some things out and see how well they actually worked in practice. And that was the start of some long-term learnings for us as a team and a partnership. The 5 resources in the first edition of the toolkit cover a range of issues. One resource outlines the history of the language that's used to describe people of migrant and refugee backgrounds in Australia and what is meant by terms such as race and ethnicity. Another resource focuses on why employing community researchers culturally and linguistically matched to the communities that you're seeking to engage in research is such a valuable and important thing to build into research processes. And alongside that, what's involved in establishing a community advisory group and what to consider before you start engaging community members in this way. We've also outlined some of our learnings about how to ascertain whether research participants have a refugee or migrant background and why this matters, and some of the challenges for researchers when translating and culturally adapting standardised measures for use in cross-cultural research, and steps that researchers can take to address these challenges. The 5 resources can be accessed via the Stronger Futures CRE website as a series of digital booklets. They're also downloadable as PDFs, and we're producing a limited number of paper copies, so do get in contact with us if you would like to receive a copy in that way. Our plan is to update them over time and also expand the series over time. And in the spirit of collaboration more broadly, we really welcome your feedback and suggestions for future editions. An initiative like this takes many hearts and minds to build, and before we close, there are a few people and organisations that require special thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank Jane Yelland and Alicia Riggs for their leadership in establishing the Refugee and Migrant Program at MCRI in partnership with Foundation House. Second, I'd like to acknowledge the team of people who worked to make the toolkit come to life, and you can see their names on the screen, including Darcy and Ben of the Oh Yeah Wow team who produced the animation. And finally, the many other people at MCRI and Foundation House that have worked together over more than a decade to enable many lessons to be learned that are now paving the way for greater social inclusion and equity in research practices. It's been an amazing journey. And finally, it's been lovely that so many people have joined us today for the webinar and registered to receive material from us in the future. Thank you all for coming along. Do take a look at the resources on our website, and we very much look forward to your feedback. Thank you.